10 trillion, I'm sorry, is too myopic. We are in the realm of Vikasit Bharat. तो ये तो बहुत कम है अभी.
We have become a very trustful nation. Trustful of whom? Our entrepreneurs. And that's what is going to take India forward from 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 trillion dollars. And I have no doubt about it.
Leverage the Quad from security to the economic agenda. Figure out how to merge America first with Atmanirbhar Bharat, and go ahead and leverage the corporate America, because they'll make things happen for you.
The world needs to know I'm aligned with everyone. I'm aligned with Putin. He's going to supply uranium to me. I'm aligned with China. They're going to give me upstream component supply because I need to grow manufacturing. I'm aligned with America because their corporations are coming to India to access India's markets. I'm aligned with everybody.
And I think under the Modi administration in the last 10 years, we have had a resolute yes. We want to do it. It's always wonderful to be back on this forum. This is a different setup, Rambhai. Congratulations. Where the spotlight is not just on the speakers, but as guests, if you are nodding off or sleeping, many people can see you. As I realized last night. This is, it's an excellent forum where we can really speak our minds. I'm not here in the capacity of Secretary to Government of India. I'm not here as a government representative even. My job, even within the government, is really to raise problems within the government. So we have a lot of like-minded people here. Welcome to all the panelists. Let me first set the stage by saying that 10 trillion, I'm sorry, is too myopic. We are in the realm and age of Vikasit Bharat, which means if we are setting our agenda for a developed nation, तो ये तो बहुत कम है अभी. This is too narrow. I'm glad many of you agree. When the Prime Minister gave us a clear vision, it's a clarion call. Where I am sitting today, my objective is to make sure every ministry of the government, every department of different ministries align themselves with this vision. That what are they going to be able to achieve this vision of a developed, progressive, Vikasit Bharat, right? Now, growth is really that fundamental fuel which is going to take us there. We should not for even once confuse that what we want is the strengthening and the burgeoning of a welfare state in itself. I focus all my energy on developmental issues. I do care about poverty and welfare. I do care a great deal about health and education, livability of cities, etc. But by no means is the role of the state limited to only providing these things. I think the fundamental role of the state today is to facilitate a growth which is not limited to 6.5% either, right? We are the fastest growing nation in the world in terms of a major nation, but 6.5 is not going to cut it. We will have to raise the aspirations. We will have to try to push the needle further. The conversation yesterday in comparisons with China are obvious. We are not China. We don't want to be China, right? It comes with curtailment of civil liberties which we can't think of. So we are a different people, we are a different nation. We are going to get there with Indian characteristics, right? And here I want to also give you a sense that growth for us, unlike many of you who might have been in Europe lately, or any of the G7 nations for that matter, where the conversation right now is of degrowth. Because sustainability in the long run from a climate, etc. perspective is seen as being attained through degrowth. Growth for us is non-negotiable. We have to grow, which means the fundamental role of the state then becomes one of how do we attain such high levels of growth. It can only happen if all the states play ball. Not all the states will play ball. But even despite this variation, can we have the sum of all these moving parts mobilize and give us the kind of movement and momentum that will get us to 20. So growth is a very important, necessary condition. That's number one. We cannot get there without growth. So degrowth or growth is not the answer to many of our problems. That conversation, in my view, it's really a confusion. It just creates short-term sort of delay. The second is, when I say Indian characteristics, there are some things you have to be mindful of. We talk about female labor force participation. By the way, India's idiosyncratic, meaning there is some peculiarity about our labor market in general. China had very high labor force participation for 40 years. Around 70-75% of the working age population was either working or looking for work. Bangladesh, Vietnam, all of them have had in excess of 65-70%. Our labor force participation, not just women, in general, on average, is barely now getting to 60%. So we have been 50 until 10 years back. So half our population was neither working nor looking for work. Because there is an obsession to taking exams. There is an obsession now to waiting till a certain age when now I have to get out and work. And while this is a youth phenomenon globally, in India, the cost is very high. We really want our youth to go out and do something, right? So we are talking of average concerns. Women are, of course, a large part of that. But we also don't want to push women into labor force the way as if it's a mechanical fix. That if women go out and make an earning in the market, that is when we are able to attribute a value to them. We have estimated care economy of India to be around 18% of the GDP. That's the kind of value that is getting created in the household. So if you were to go out and buy this care, this is the kind of money we would be spending. That is of value. So families matter. Right? We are a country where if you speak to the elders, many of you might still consider population as a problem, and yet we are well below replacement rate already. At under $3,000 per capita per income, our fertility has already begun to decline very sharply. Urban India has been below replacement rate for 25 years now. So I'm here to generally sensitize you to the reality of where we want to be and some of the structural problems that we are now ready to face, but we must know that these are structural problems, right? So setting that broader context, I'm going to invite each of my speakers here to first give their vision of what do they see as Vikasit Bharat 2047. First, we'll start with that, and then we'll ask them of what are the large challenges or the constraints that they see in getting there, right? So Mukesh ji, I'll start with you. What is Vikasit Bharat for you?
Well, thank you, Shamika, and good morning to everybody. And I will give a perspective from US because you have to understand the economy of the US is still growing. For the last 10 years, its share of global GDP has gone up and up. And we have a new administration coming on January 20th. And you will see, I call a internal turmoil and some external waves, especially in the supply chain and global trade. Now, keeping that in mind, the ambition of India to be at 10, 20, 30 trillion is very real. The question is, what will it take to reach that objective? One of the most important things for India is to keep on attracting, on the average, $100 billion FDI annually. Unless we are able to secure that, the growth challenge becomes much more prohibitive because you have to bring in foreign direct investment and also technology from that perspective. So now the question you have to ask is, you have Trump administration which is coming in, which is saying America first, which is saying that 20% tariff on every goods coming in except China, where 60% they're putting in. So you will see a massive shift happening and disruption happening in global supply chain. I think it's important to understand that that's where India has to maneuver dealing with Trump administration as to keep on getting the investment coming into India. Since it's an ideas conclave, I will leave three different perspectives to take forward as we deal with the incoming Trump administration to drive this ambition of a 10, 20, or $30 trillion economy. Number one, you have to understand the appointments Trump is making, especially in defense arena. You have Ratcliffe, who's coming as director of CIA. You have Mike Waltz, who's coming as national security advisor. And then you have Mark Rubio, who's coming as Secretary of State. All three are China hawks. They basically want to take China head on, be very aggressive with China. And they say India is an ally from their perspective. So that means we have to leverage the security aspect of that ambition of America dealing with China, which can percolate into our economic ambitions with the United States. That means, number one, you have a Quad arena where you have 4 countries, Japan, Australia, India, and United States. If you look at the GDP, it's around $35 trillion. US has a trade agreement, FTA, with Japan. It has a FTA with Australia. India has some kind of a trade agreement with Japan and also with Australia. So we need to figure out how do we basically get these 4 economies to trade a little more efficiently, to transfer technology, move capital, because now you are basically working in a very closed environment which is tied to a security umbrella. You have to understand it was Trump who elevated the Quad to a state leadership level. So that's his child. He sees that. So we got to leverage that. That's very critical. Now, once you drive from a security umbrella to an economic umbrella, you will see an easy transition happening from an India perspective also. Because it is important to understand almost every large economy in the world after the Second World War leveraged US to grow itself.
True.
You look at Japan, look at Korea, you look at Germany, look at UK or France, even China.
Yeah.
Without US, China would have not grown to that economy. So I think India has to leverage that. So that's one. And it's critical to understand, for example, within the Quad umbrella, we talk about, and we need to start talking about secure supply chain or secure sourcing, because it's no longer friend-shoring, it's no longer about outsourcing. We need to convey the message, we are a security partner. Secure sourcing is critical for you from India itself. Pharma, for example, 39% of the prescription drugs in the United States come from India. But 70% of the API India gets is from China. How do you basically work together to drive that secure sourcing itself? The second aspect is basically America first. You have to understand, America has been a very generous nation by investing in other countries, opening its economy. And I think where it has kind of been left behind is China took advantage of that, especially flouting the WTO rules. And in the last 40 years, almost every manufacturing has moved to China. And the US has lost millions of jobs. And almost it has an impact on very high on unemployment, especially in the blue collars. So the masses are upset about that. So they are saying America first, and that's one of the reasons Trump won the election itself. It is important from an India perspective that we somehow marry America first with Atmanirbhar Bharat. And the reason I say that is we should start changing the thinking of China plus one strategy to US plus one strategy. And the reason I say that, for example, US is focusing on chips coming in, manufacturing in the US, but they're 9 nanometers and below. India is focused on chip manufacturing, which is 20 nanometer and up itself. Or we look at from other aspect of supply chain. See, you have to understand, it took 40 years for manufacturing to move out of US into China. It will take minimum 20 years for it to move back. That's why India can play a pivotal role by saying US plus one strategy, because we are a security partner, we're going to work with you. The final thing I like to say is corporate America. Regardless, you may say who's most powerful, the White House or the State Department, others, is the corporate America. You have to understand, they drive their agenda in every aspect. You look at Elon Musk putting over $30 million in Trump's election campaign, basically taking X, driving the whole agenda. Look at the appointments. Most of the appointments are coming from the Wall Street itself. So we need to start thinking how we leverage that. I'll give you 2 incidents where it sends a very strong story. We worked very closely with Elon Musk to come to India. We worked with the PMO, we worked with everybody to change the policy. 1 hour before he was supposed to get on the plane, he calls me and said, listen, Mukesh, I'm not going. And no explanation. We had to convey here, we had to fix the meeting with the Prime Minister. And next day, we found out that basically the Chinese had stepped in and said, listen, we will give you everything you want. Don't go to India. That's one. And this was month of May, when there's a prime election campaign for the Prime Minister itself. The second thing they said is, we'll give you more. In 3 days, you come to China and meet with the premier there. In essence, basically, we'll stop Tesla coming into India, but we will also stop him meeting with the Indian Prime Minister by showing that he's meeting with the Chinese Prime Minister. You have to understand, in every category, China will make every effort. Yes, it has kind of eased up on the border with India. It will make sure that from every aspect, the rise of India does not go past China's rise. That is a given factor, and that will continue to play. The second aspect I like to say is this: when President Xi comes to US, what he does is the first set of meetings always happens with corporate America. So what they have done is they have basically selected 50 companies, 50 CEOs, and basically granted them more like an honorary Chinese citizenship. They have access to everybody in China, so they can move things very efficiently. Yes, we are a democracy here. Yes, states have their own agenda itself. But I'll give you an example. A global chairman of a company who has large 10 mega factories in China wanted to move 8 of them to India. And he calls from London. He's waiting for his plane landing rights for the last 48 hours to be landed in India so he can decide to set up those factories. So I think what the message is we have to target the top 50 companies, top 50 technology, we want them to come to India and make sure these companies, their CEOs are able to move efficiently in this market. So 3 different things I like to suggest, again, in closing, is basically leverage the Quad from security to the economic agenda, figure out how to merge America first with Atmanirbhar Bharat, and go ahead and leverage the corporate America, because they'll make things happen for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mukesh. Before I get to you, Ashish, on Atmanirbhar Bharat, I think this is something the audience here should be appraised of. That, if 10 years back you visited Delhi, the common phrase you would hear is, India has lost or missed the manufacturing bus. This is a very common phrase. And the thinking, of course, at that point was extremely myopic, that since China is building everything cheaper, there's no point us trying to outcompete them because we can't, right? Then, of course, the world changes. But even without the world changing, our domestic reality is that 500 million people have to be moved out of agriculture. And that is not going to happen through services alone. In fact, it is a naive thinking that people can make the switch from agriculture to services. And this is a country that can completely bypass manufacturing. Manufacturing is fundamentally linked with livelihoods. And what we are seeing in the US too today is industrial policy, which is euphemistically, of course, it's a term economists we use, but basically it means the government in the US is going to do everything that it can to get a lot of these manufacturing jobs back. Because livelihoods matter, and they matter more in democracies where it has very obvious, clear political and social implications. We don't know what will happen in China. China is built differently. But in India, manufacturing now is increasingly going to become the backbone. Of course, we are still at a fledgling state in many sectors, but we have our successes. And we are seeing, and we are trying to see through policies such as the PLI, etc. But it's good to know that there are possibilities to marry the two industrial policies by basically saying, look, the idea is to wean away a lot of these over-dependencies that we have, particularly on China, and we can find common ground, particularly if we move the Quad from simply being seen as a defense and a strategic, a kind of a collaboration or alignment to also economic. In fact, one movement which we did do, which was in Quad in the beginning, was vaccines. The funding would come from Japan. Australia would help us distribute, and Pfizer was to, at that point, support. But of course, we went on to make lots and lots of vaccines, not just for our domestic demand. We might be the poorest country which actually has capability to manufacture and vaccinate about 1 billion people twice over, and export to 60 countries, even in the midst of the pandemic. So I do think we have aspirations, Mukeshji, and we do realize that manufacturing is at the core of a lot of our economic policy. We have to have industrialization. We have to completely rethink the role of industry in where Vikasit Bharat is going to be in the future. Ashishji, what is your sense of Vikasit Bharat?
In a way, for me, if we look back at our past, then only we'll be able to figure out where we are and where we can go. So if you take a kind of a cut at liberalization date, say 91, what we were doing then and what we have done over a period. For me, what we have done over last, say, 33 years is largely, in a way, we have become more confident, which itself is a large catalyst in our going up. But we have become what I call a bottom-up economy. We were, like China, we were trying from 1947 to 1991, we were a top-down economy. China is still top-down economy, that few people plan, and then the rest of the world economy is to just fall in line and do whatever they are told. In India, we tried, we failed, and then we said, let there be light, and that's how little light has been given, not too much, still lots and lots of controls. But coming to your argument on manufacturing, why India did not do manufacturing? One is, of course, China did, and China did it very well. But manufacturing is a physical thing. Things come, things go into the country, into state borders. Every type of bureaucracy can stop it. Even your bananas getting exported, which is no tax, right? They can still be lying at the ship, at the port for 3 weeks, and they will basically, by the time they reach, they will be bad, right? So that's where, for me, why we couldn't do manufacturing despite SEZs is because of the way the controls worked, which still they do. If we don't sort of smartly dismantle them, our dreams of doing manufacturing might remain. But in the process, we continue to argue the same way that manufacturing is the lifeblood of moving people from agriculture to sort of industry. That's what even Baba Saheb Ambedkar wrote in 1920s, when he was actually a PhD in economics from Columbia, right? And he wrote about it because that time there was no services. What happened over a period is that 91 onwards, many of us from Bangalore, Bombay, everyone started trying, and it became a situation where some of the tries became very successful, and they became Infosys. They became the first generation of getting the services in, and then all the GCCs, and now even everyone is trying to teach yoga or English or mathematics sitting here to Russians and getting that $20, $30. For me, let's not underestimate services at all. Services has got where we have come. From 91, 2024, at least 100 times more money and a lot of banking NPAs have gone into manufacturing. Very little outcome has been there. In the services, very little inputs has gone, but most of your jobs, most of your prosperity today has come out of services. The second part is that the WTO. In WTO, US gave tremendous concessions to China to get it weaned away from Russian orbit. From 1972, Kissinger went through Pakistan into China and stuff like that. But basically, since then, India got no such thing. But even if you would have got, we would have ourselves defeated ourselves in terms of our bureaucracy stopping everything, right? So that's why, for me, services is not in WTO. And it is not stoppable, neither by our bureaucracy nor by their smart people. And that's where, even if you have AI happening there, most of it is actually manufactured here. The brains are here. And somewhere we will go up the value chain. So I have no doubt in my mind that today we are having a great run on services. Let's work on it from whatever $450 billion. In next 5 years, can we make it 1 trillion, then 5 trillion? Let's try to work on that. Let's not underestimate. It's a fallacy, in my opinion, to do Me Too. If we try to do Me Too with China, we might be successful, but we may not have profits because they are going to compete. We are going to compete with them and stuff like that. At the same time, we are getting into some very high-tech manufacturing in mobile phones, other things. We are now not going from, again, the bottom side, we are going from top side. We are giving good facilities in different states. As you rightly said, the states are actually competing and they should. Hopefully, we will make it into manufacturing, but let's not drop the ball, which we did. From 91 to 2024, we have not focused on services at all. Services has grown on its own. And good that government did not get involved because sometimes you wonder whether it would have also fallen like manufacturing. So for me, you need to be aware of the fallacies which we keep in our mind because that time when Ambedkar Sahab wrote, there was no services. Today, sitting here, you can do almost everything in America except cutting hair. Right? Someday that technology comes, then our people will be cutting hair there also. Why I'm telling you this is services are now transferable, which was not true earlier. And that is most of the economic textbooks which are written 150 years old are missing out on that. And our living realities are very different. Having said that, today we are $4.2 trillion. We have, with good, bad, ugly, we have grown 7%, average 6.5%, 7% for last 33 years. If we continue even at that low level, we will just on a compounding basis, we'll reach somewhere 25 trillion in 2047, right? And naturally, we can't have, as you rightly said, that aspiration of running at 6.5, 7. We should be going 8, 9, 10. And why, I have a hypothesis of why we will grow faster, or we can go faster, is because of the technology. The technology is the only change that happens in the world. And every type of wealth gets created only due to technology, nothing else. So earlier, the technology was such that you required huge capital to create more capital. We were perennially short of capital, and 1,000 years of subjugation, we had no capital in 1947 except few families. And that's where 1991 onwards, technology started coming up. Some people started businesses not from traditional families. They became billionaires. They became role models for others to follow. Today, we have literally every child, every boy and every girl wants to become a Nandan Nilekani or Narayan Murthy or Bini Bansal. For me, that is what we have achieved. And the future wealth will be created out of very little capital, like what we have seen in Zomato, what we have seen in Swiggy. Very little capital was put in. Compared to that, we have put huge capital, created NPAs out of manufacturing sector, right? So for me, using less capital, you can create huge capital. And that is what I call the new capitalism for me, is capitalism without capital. That you can create great wealth without capital. And that is where India has mastered that art. And India also has created a framework for the smallest to the largest to raise that fund that they require. You will have 10,000 flowers bloom, 100,000 flowers bloom. Some of them will succeed and they will become Infosys of tomorrow. They will become Swiggy of tomorrow. And that's for me where those people, sometimes we feel that everyone, even trespassers are getting funded by private equity people. That is not true. Out of 10,000 companies that start, only 1 or 2 get funded, provided they are somewhere connected into that private equity venture capital framework. Although page 3 of pink papers make you think that everyone gets funded, nobody does. The other 9,998 still require fund. And today, Indian Stock Exchange, NSE, is allowing you to raise that fund. When NSE started in 1994, it came out of a scandal in 92, but 94 it started operation. India's total market capitalization was 4 lakh crore. Today, there are at least 100 companies in that 4 lakh crore plus market cap range, but totally the market cap is now 440 lakh crore. That wealth is a collective wealth, but also it has come out of that capitalism without capital framework. Many of these companies did not exist then, or were very small. In fact, Infosys IPO which came actually failed. And the underwriters who underwrote the issue so that if it fails, they will take it up, they became accidental billionaires. Why I'm telling you this is India with a low per capita income country, you started with saying $3,000 per capita income. The economic theory suggests that no such country, if $3,000 per capita income, can have a well-functioning capital market. Why? It's because poor people cannot save. And if they save, they don't trust even their brothers. How come a person sitting in Jammu or Srinagar or Dibrugarh or Jorhat is investing her hard-earned 1,000 rupees into a company in Salem in Tamil Nadu? That is a great leap of faith, right? That person will work for her, give her that share of profit which is due to her. It's unbelievable sort of a leap of faith which India has developed. Today, 1/3 of India's wealth is now coming out of NSE. That $5.3 trillion is 1/3 of India's wealth, and that is what I call wealth of trust. Trust in whom? Trust in India's entrepreneurs. We are trying to malign them today, but they are going to actually take us forward. They are the engine of this country, and we must learn to respect them. We must learn to celebrate their achievement. Instead, we are trying to actually bring them down. But for me, irrespective, whoever is trying to do whatever, Indian people, the 10 crore and 50 lakh people today, direct, unique people. I have 20 crore investors, investor account, 10.5 crore unique investors. 20% of India's households. It's larger than number of farmers, by the way. Investing directly into India's entrepreneurs. We have become a very trustful nation. Trustful of whom? Our entrepreneurs. And that's what is going to take India forward from 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 to $40 trillion. And I have no doubt about it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think a lot of economic reforms which are also being attempted is to reinstate this faith in the private enterprise. Because somewhere down the line, it has been a tumultuous relationship. And here it's important to understand it's not just the government, right? It's the state of India. By that, I mean also the judiciary. We have had retrospective tax, and we had a mention of that yesterday. We have had coal allocation getting annulled after 18 years. It doesn't usually happen. But these are the kind of tensions that arise when there is inherent mistrust, that making money is seen as vice and not celebrated as a virtue. But I think the younger generation, Ashish, I think you rightfully said, we are shifting that gaze, because we know that a lot of our growth, including when we think of Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and mobile, which is the basis of almost all the welfare that we do in the country, the mobile part of the jam, the M part of that is almost entirely on the back of private enterprise, right? But at the same time, this is where services deserves its crown, right? And rightfully so. It has really tied us over and so on. And of course, we have a long way to go because the IT is giving way to AI and we need to further innovate and do more. But I'll tell you, today, one thing we have to understand, even when we compare ourselves to China, is that if you look at the consumption data of India, 10 years back, if you look at the bottom 20% of the population, which means the poorest quintile, only 4% of them owned some kind of vehicle, mostly scooter, bike, etc., right? Today, that number is above 40%. Do you realize what is happening in terms of just the nature of consumption and what is the power of India's domestic demand? I think it's very important for us to understand that unlike China, which has a repressed demand and hence faces the external tumult to a much greater extent than we are insulated also because we have this extremely potent domestic market. And therefore, when we think of manufacturing, it is not just another sector in the economy, it is also a strategic sector. It is linked with livelihoods, as we have seen in case of the Western democracies, but it is also fundamentally linked to the fact that low-end manufacturing, you know, in the midst of the pandemic when China began to deny us APIs, some of us, we did a calibration of what exactly are we over-dependent on the Chinese for, right? And of course, there are many, many critical inputs, but then sofas, umbrellas, like very low-end electronics, and then you begin to wonder, are you kidding me? We are not in a position, this is not even high-tech. ये कौन सा टेक्नोलॉजी का वेट कर रहे हैं so that we open our strategic asset of a domestic demand market for cheap products, right? So there is an efficiency argument to be made that, of course, just like the Americans, they enjoyed cheap products for a very long period of time, but it has a cost. And that cost comes in the form of longer term strategic growth, right? Today, industrial policy is much more expensive to do because you're undoing a lot of stuff. So for us, we are doing a catch-up because we've never really had a very large manufacturing base to begin with. So in some sense, it's greenfield, but our domestic demand drives a lot of that. The other thing to keep in mind, China's growth happened by exporting to OECD. Of course, they've also gotten into Latin America, Africa, etc. But remember, the rest of the world is also growing. So demand for even simple manufactured items, right? Clothes, books, furnitures, etc., not high-tech. That entire demand is rising. And as you see companies doing the China plus one and sort of moving their supply chain elsewhere, for India, this is a major window of opportunity. So if we do not give manufacturing the kind of strategic space it deserves, we are going to not miss a bus. You shouldn't think of missing a bus when it comes to manufacturing. You know, the world economy is an organic living being. There are buses and buses coming. The point is, are we as Indians ready to get onto a bus, which is a manufacturing bus? And I think under the Modi administration in the last 10 years, we have had a resolute yes. We want to do it. Where are we comparatively better? Where is the cost higher? Those are calibrations which are always on their way. Last, Ridham, what is Vikasit Bharat for you?
So I think it is fair to say that 7-8 centuries ago, India was the epicenter of world material and spiritual wealth. We were the exporters of material and spiritual insights to the world. So my definition of Viksit Bharat is to regain that position. It won't happen in my lifetime, but I hope by the turn of this century, we will once again become the world's epicenter for material and spiritual wealth. Now, I think there are so many things that are happening. We can't do justice to this in 1 hour, but I'm trying to focus on 5 big changes that seem to be underway, which gives me the optimism that we are getting there. So the first change, which I think we as economists do not report because we can't measure it. We like to measure things. Is the change in spirituality. I am just amazed how young people are refinding India's culture. Okay, young people now realize that last Sunday was Kartik Purnima. And when I was growing up, people didn't care. And there is so much of knowledge embedded in our scriptures which has not changed. I'm a big fan of physics. Physics insights are changing daily. What Newton said about gravity, Einstein violated it, and today quantum physics is not sure whether gravity is the way they understand it. But the way our ancients understood the world is unchanged. So we can rely on that. So I see that spiritual change. I think that is the foundation to the progress that we're going to make. The second big thing that I'm seeing in the history of the world, ours is the only society that worship the female form. आपको कहीं नहीं मिलेगा. Nobody worships the female form, right? All concepts of God or force of nature is male, except in this society. We lost that somewhere along the way, right? And it is best evident so painfully in the rise in female feticide that started in the late 70s. By 2012, our gender ratio was at 1.1. We were killing 10% of our children in the womb of the mother. And then the Prime Minister came with this Beti Pachao program, strictly implemented the ban on gender determination before birth. And we are already seeing the effects of that as we discussed in the green room. So we are seeing female feticide decline. I think the National Health Survey is likely to put that number at 106. So it's not back to 1:1 where it ought to be. But this is a big decline.
It's never going to be 1:1.
Yeah, but
more boys are born because more girls survive. By the way, it's important for you to know. Girls survive more. We are inbuilt.
Absolutely. That is why we worship the... No. There is science as to why this society worships the female form. It is far more resilient. I'll digress a moment. Last year, I delivered a lecture on why women make for better investors. Okay. You don't have the data because we don't allow women to be investors. And I tell people, please ask your wife or your daughter where you should invest. She'll give you better advice. And the biggest reason why women make for better investors is because they have stronger stomachs. Investing is not here, it's here. You need guts. You need stable guts to invest. So anyway, so the female form is making a comeback. Infant mortality is down, and as we discussed, it's intricately linked to Swachh Bharat and all the collateral gains that are coming from the actions of the last 10 years. But the bottom line is that I think the woman power in this country is making a return. This is another foundational stone to success. If women are oppressed, you cannot progress as society. So I think we made these two major transformations in the last 10 years. The third transformation is with respect to macro policy. So see, for almost 7 decades, the instinct of our policymakers was collect taxes, redistribute to poor people. So I had done some calculation that between 1985 and 2014, we redistributed $1/2 trillion US of taxes to poor people. Guess what happened? Poverty rate was unchanged, 29%. कोई भी आदमी गरीबी से उठा नहीं. So much of money went into poor people's hand, but nobody became less poor. Because the secret to reducing poverty is not redistribution, it is opportunity. And I think that is the other thing that's changing. And it's informed by the Prime Minister's obsession with inflation.
Yep.
Because I think growing up as he did, as an RSS Pracharak, working with poor people, he realized that what kills poor people is inflation. So at no cost can we let inflation come back. And in fact, that is the wisdom that made him mandate the RBI to target inflation, which was never there in India's law books, and that too headline. Because we need to have low inflation. And we have achieved a lot. Inflation volatility in India is the lowest in the world, which is why there is a bull market in Indian equities. We won't go into that, but the collateral gain here is that we are seeing a decline in poverty and we are seeing a boom in wealth. I just published a report last week which calculates, Ashish, that the total wealth accretion in the last 10 years for Indian households is about $10 trillion US. This number is not concentrated, as a lot of us have been made to believe. It is dispersed. Ashish, in fact, messaged me saying that I should have used a different data set because I was using DMAT accounts. And he said, but I have actual data on number of people. 100 million people have gained from this, which is about 400 million people if you include households. That's a staggering dispersion of wealth creation that has happened in the last 10 years. And it is informed by some really judicious macro policy. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing, I think, and Ashish alluded to it, and I think the reason why we accounted for 25% of world GDP at 500 years ago was because of entrepreneurial zeal. Indians are hardwired to take risk. We're entrepreneurs. And that spirit had been suppressed, and I see it coming back. As I was mentioning, I have been on like 65 or 70 plane rides in the last 1 year. And it's not to meet investors, it's largely to meet entrepreneurs. And the type of people who are doing businesses in this country, whether it is extracting moisture from the air and converting it into potable water, whether it is Agnikul that just 3D printed a rocket engine and fired it, or it is companies that are building long range batteries, or companies that are doing quantum security. It is just amazing. In fact, Amish is on the next panel, and I spent 2 hours with his brother, okay, who has an incredible idea that is seeding, which will change the world of health. Okay, it's happening here. So I think the entrepreneurial zeal is back, and that is the fourth foundation. And the last one, is what Mukesh ji mentioned, and I will actually take that and expand it further. It is not just America. We have diversified our external reach like never before. We're engaged with China, we're engaged with the Middle East, we're engaged with Russia, we're engaged down with Australia, a little less so with Latin America, but certainly with North America. And this engagement, I think, is critical for us to regain our voice in the world, which was kind of suppressed. We went into this thing called non-aligned movement, which is, I think, very poor geopolitics. I think you need to be aligned. And the world needs to know, I'm aligned with everyone. I'm aligned with Putin. He's going to supply uranium to me. I'm aligned with China. They're going to give me upstream component supply because I need to grow manufacturing. I'm aligned with America because their corporations are coming to India to access India's markets. I'm aligned with everybody, because everybody is going to bring something to me and I'm going to give something to them. So I think these are major foundational changes that have happened in the last 10 years, and it gives me great hope that my daughter will see India regain its due powerful position in the world. Viksit Bharat.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So basically, I think the shift in the alignment, we are basically now aligned with our own national interest. And I think that determines a lot of our international relations as well. And I think every negotiation is beginning to recognize that. So it is not just in terms of feeling good, it actually has real implications as far as treaties and negotiations, etc. are concerned. Now I have been a full-time government babu for 2 years. The one thing that I must say I derive most strength from is being a professor.
Is there a female word for babu?
I don't want to get into that. I'm sure there must be. But to your point, Ridham, what I gain most, Delhi can become very pessimistic, by the way, to those of you who visit and you feel like, oh, we're not moving fast enough, too much bureaucracy. And all of you have alluded to the delays and sort of the lethargy in the system. But that's why it's important to get out of Delhi. And what I enjoy is, I've been teaching in business schools for 20 years, and I often wonder the kind of energy. When we were in college, cool kids had guitars and bands and music. Today, all the cool kids have startups. And they have incubators, and they know where to raise the capital. And most of the fast-growing sectors, even within startups, are ag tech, health tech, ed tech, which are all solving basically fundamentally Indian problems. And I think that is where a lot of the optimism is getting fuel from as well. And I completely agree with you. On the women, and I think 2047 vision would be absolutely incomplete if we didn't realize the fact, as Prime Minister has often mentioned very explicitly, one is just the dignity to the people in the way the government deals with people. So you will hear a lot of talk of dignity, right? But that is not just in terms of welfare. No more poverty parade, no more standing in front of government officials to get what is duly yours in the form of any form of welfare, right? That is what the DBTs and all are meant to be. But I think in a very fundamental way, women are also lifting the society in ways which we haven't seen in the last 70 years. And that is why every election, and today of course everyone's buzzing, everyone's on their cell phone since the morning, women voters cannot be ignored by anyone anymore. And of course what started with Ladli Lakshmi in Madhya Pradesh 4 years back, different forms of it is finding roots across. And some of you show worry because, oh, this is a freebie culture. But please realize that most of the time these kind of DBTs, etc. are finding ground also because aspirationally we want to give a lot to the electorate or the citizens. The state capacities are not keeping up with the aspirations of people, what they want from the state. And DBTs are often seen as the most efficient and the least costly way to meet some of these aspirations. But by no means does it mean that state capacity by itself is not something which is constantly being worked upon by what we call process reform. And my colleague in the EAC, Sanjeev Sanyal, he spends almost all his time just worrying about these set of issues. I'll come back for the second round, last round, but really just give you 1 minute each. Mukesh ji, US and India are like living two, countries with democracies. We have this living bridge in terms of just the number of people. What used to be our relationship with the UK before, it's now with the US. We have lots of our youth, who are settled, who are no longer youth. They're running companies and the economy in the US. We want to have a better relationship with the US, and the US also wants to have better relationship with us. Trump is giving us a window of opportunity, hopefully. What do you foresee as one big challenge that we should really be focusing on right now?
When you look at Trump, basically he is going to be a transactional president, not a structural president. And while the Prime Minister has a very good relationship with him, I think geopolitically our alignment with the US is very, very strong. Economically, our trade is around $200 billion. The technology transfer under ISET is taking place, and you have roughly 5.5 million Indian Americans, which make around 1.5% of the population, but they're producing 6% of the GDP. So doing very well. I think the biggest challenge we see in the Trump administration, if you don't handle it right, is going to be the economic aspect. Because when you have America First driving his agenda, and they basically go and put 20% tariff on India, and I can envision the bureaucracy having a knee-jerk reaction to that. We will also put 20% rather than thinking how we manage that. That's where I see early on some kind of a turbulence in the relationship. Geopolitically, absolutely, we are aligned from that perspective.
Good.
But I just want to come back on other aspect on the manufacturing. Manufacturing is not just about economic growth. Today, manufacturing is also about national security. The Ukraine war showed very clearly, we have crossed 1,000 days of war, that if you don't have a strong industrial base, you cannot sustain a war mid to long term itself. So it is important that India keeps on driving its industrial-based manufacturing agenda as strong as it can, because it's not just about economy, it's about national security also.
That's an excellent point. And also from history, we learn that most societies that have industrialized late, conditions are always adversarial, which means we really have to balance a lot internationally to get there, but it's of critical need. Ashish, what in your view is the one big challenge towards Vikasit Bharat?
I think in terms of the commercial disputes resolution,
We are taking too long?
we are taking too long, and we had a good experiment in the IBB, basically
IBC.
the bankruptcy code. But again, with courts ensuring that all of them take the same amount of time, which is basically more than a lifetime.
The tribunals need to.
The commercial disputes have to be resolved
Okay.
extremely fast. Not that other disputes should not be resolved faster, but we must ensure that we have a reformed and decisive framework in our judiciary, because that is where the fast-moving societies will be able to do. The other side of the same fast movement is most of our laws, our regulations, our norms, our directives, our guidelines, literally every company or every business, if they want to follow, they probably follow close to 20 lakh odd regulations which keep on changing, right? So how do we rationalize them? So those are the two important aspects from the commercial, including industrialization or services, from literally lift maintenance act to electricity Inspector Act to all sorts of other things. Right?
So basically, the more the delay, the capital remains trapped. And so if we want it to be moved faster into more productive, that's why delays are very expensive. Ridham, what do you think?
I think you alluded to that already. I think it's the farm sector. 40% of our workforce works on farmlands, produces 15% of our output.
Yeah.
It is sick. And it needs to be totally reformed. And it's very unfortunate that the Prime Minister's seminal effort to do that has been scuttled. That seemed like the Industrial Revolution movement of 1991, but it's gone to the back burner. I think if we don't fix this, we'll have a crisis. Because we don't need more than 50 million farmers. Okay, to do what we do. And if we put all the scientific inputs and the industrial equipment that is available, we don't need this many farmers. So obviously this is disguised employment. They need to be redeployed. And you know, the tragedy of our farm sector, and this dates back to the wisdom of our constitution writers, because they made farm a state subject, right? So reforming the farm sector is that much harder. Anything that is state in this country is very hard to reform, like land, labor, farm, electricity. But the tragedy is that the productivity of the farm sector is so low. And when I last saw this data, and Shamika, correct me if I'm wrong, the amount of farmland that we've had in this country is largely unchanged, 350 million acres. Our productivity is 1/4 of China. If we operated at Chinese productivity levels, the farm sector will be a $2 trillion economy. Viksit Bharat has already happened. Only one thing needs to be fixed: farmers.
So that's very well put. It's a sensitive subject. I remember about 8-9 years back, I was a lot more naive then. I wrote this on social media that the best way to double farmers' income to halve the number of farmers. And she said, look, she's asking for them to be killed. And well, that's the reality of crazy talk.
I'm not saying that. But you know, we are already the world's largest producer of wheat, second for rice, largest for tea, largest for almost everything. And we could actually feed half the world. So I'm not saying we need to reduce the farmers. I'm saying with the current state of output, we don't need this many. So raise the output. All the farmers will have a job. But to raise the output, we need to undertake reform.
So Ridham, I think the beauty inherent in the way the country is organized is that though the farm laws didn't go through, and there were many of us disappointed, I was for sure. But I think one thing we don't realize is a lot of the implementation has happened in their own way across states. So today your two agricultural superstars in India are no longer Punjab, Haryana, Western UP. It's Madhya Pradesh, it's Bihar, right? These are countries where diversification has happened at a rate where you have no idea. They are growing the best quality of grains as well, which means also they actually demand a premium even in the market. So if you go to buy wheat, Madhya Pradesh wheat or Madhya Pradesh dal has a premium and almost 30% above the market. So I think the beauty of this federal structure...
I know that because I was born in a rickety town called Dahod. And it is also the place where the Prime Minister started his journey as RSS Pracharak. But Dahod has the largest grain commodity market, and Madhya Pradesh dal, soya bean is all traded there. It sits 30 kilometers from Dahod. So I have grown up knowing this, how it has all transformed.
So that's the beauty, right? That the farm laws didn't go through at a national level, but the states have more or less made their arrangement and they are bringing about
that's good news.
Many of the reforms.
I hope more of that happens. Two states will not cut it.
Well, now that is where the tension rises, that then a state like Punjab, which is fundamentally dependent on agriculture, the cross-subsidization means it is our only state which has seen active de-industrialization in the last 20 years. It is a case study for us what not to do in many ways, right? But I think a large federal structure, like someone mentioned yesterday, if we are suggesting recommending a reform, some part of it has already happened somewhere in the country. And that also fuels optimism that, you know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't really have to look at China for many things. Many of these, you know, successes, etc., have already emerged. So we really need to replicate from one another. One thing for sure, as the audience and my panelists here, my speakers here, everyone is very optimistic, right? And you have to just travel outside this country to understand and feel this optimism. You come back to India and we all know that something's going wonderfully good. We just need to stay at it. Some of us do get a little impatient with the bureaucracy, each of us, at least on the panel here. But I think Delhi is one part of the larger puzzle. I think the rest of the economy is also leading Delhi in ways where we want the nation to be by 2047. Thank you very much, all of you, for your comments. Thank you very much.